Chapter 5. Omally turned right at the traffic lights, right again, and finally right into Ganesha Lane. Marchant rattled over the uneven cobbles, and John spread wide his legs as they swept down into the alleyway that led past Cider Island to the weir, the abandoned boatyards and the venerable Thames. John dismounted as they reached the weir. Weird and wonderful Marchant might have been, but he did not include the climbing of steps as part of his metaphysical repertoire. Omally shouldered his bike, skipped up the steps and continued on his way, whistling brightly. Suddenly, the bright and breezy, devil-may-care jauntiness of his step vanished, to be replaced by a furtive, shifty, quite definitely guilt-ridden scuttle. Omally was up to something. A slowing of pace, a quick shufty over the shoulder, a sudden movement, a section of corrugated iron swings aside, and a boy and his bike vanished from the footpath and were lost to view. Beyond the iron fencing, the long-abandoned boatyard slumbered. The pointless walls of the derelict buildings were decked with festoons of convolvulus. The windows swagged with cobwebs. Here and there the tragic debris of the once proud trade showed as tiny islands amidst a grassy ocean. Here a crane, strung like a fractured gibbet. There the gears and gubbins overripe with rust. Capstans and winches, pulleys and blocks, blurred with moss, weather-worn and worthless. At a quayside beyond, the dark hulk of an ancient barge wallowed in oily water. Once the glittering island boatyard, strung like a necklet about the borough's throat, had prospered. Here the barks and pleasure boats, the punts and Thames steamers had taken form from the hand-hewn timbers, fashioned with the care of craftsmen. Now it was no more. Here and there a yard survived, heavily secured with barbed wire and night-prowling dogs, knocking out plastic dinghies or casting fiberglass hulls for Arabian moguls, floating gin palaces for the camel jockeys on holiday. The life had gone, and that particular form of melancholia which haunts places of bygone commerce washed over the buildings in waves of lavender blue. For blue is the colour of tears and water, sea and sadness. Omally left Marchant to rest upon a handlebar, the reflected glory of the early sun cupped in his headlamp. Hitching up his trousers, he set out to wade through the waist-deep grass toward the ancient barge. Upon reaching the edge of the wharf, he again paused to assure himself that he remained unobserved. When so assured, he dropped down onto the barge and tapped out an elaborate tattoo upon the hull. A head popped up from the inner depths, and a voice, that of Jim Pooley, owner of the head, called out, "What's your mate, John? You're late." Omally shinned through the hatchway and down into the bowels of the wreck. The interior presented a more surprising and unexpected appearance. Over a period of many months, Pooley and Omally had effected a conversion of a most enterprising nature. The superannuated vessel now housed a distillery, a series of grandiose fish tanks, wherein lay river fish of prize-winning proportions, a storehouse for rerouted goods, and a comfortable salon for the entertaining of special guests. A line of portholes below waterline looked out upon a string of elaborate fish traps set out above the distillery cooling tubes. This was the headquarters of what was known to a select few as the P&O line. There was much of Captain Nemo's Nautilus to the thing, but there was a good deal more of Fagin's kitchen. Although, in evidence for the defence, it must be stated that John and Jim drew the line before coining or the manufacture of hard drugs. Pooley and Omally took their morning coffee in the forward salon. The style was essentially eclectic. A hint of postmodernism here, a touch of rococo there, several boxes of video cassettes just beyond the door, a pair of blown glass vases, signed by Count Otto Bode himself, adorned a chromium table of the high-tech persuasion. An antique paisley-swathed gaudy sun-lounger. 3 china ducks flew nowhere. Omally stuck his feet upon the Le Corbusier chaise, and Pooley leant upon the Memphis-style cocktail cabinet, dunking a breakfast biscuit. "Well," said Jim, when he finally tired of the sight of his partner's inane grin. "Good night, was it?" O'Malley's smile resembled that of the legendary Gwynplaine. "Propriety forbids a disclosure of details," he said, as he dandled his demi-tasse. "But it was magic." "I'm so glad." The two drank on in silence, Omally mentally replaying selected highlights and Pooley glowering with evident envy. When he could stand no more of that, Jim said, "We got 4. They must be £5 easily." Omally raised his eyebrows and smiled his winning smile. "Well now, Neville will take one for the Saturday sarnies and another for his freezer, I have no doubt." "Wally Woods will take the other 2 then." Omally frowned briefly, for the effort vexed him. Wally Woods, Brentford's foremost purveyor of wet fish, was a cold and slippery little customer. "No," said John. "We'll do them off in Ailing, at the King's Head or the Fly's Home." "As you please." Omally finished his coffee and refilled his cup from the snazzy-looking percolator. "How the accounts shaping up?" he asked, in a tone of casual inquiry. Jim raised an eyebrow of his own. He was well aware that the Irishman had logged within his curly head the dismal sum of their current assets. "If this business was legitimate," he sighed, "we would be in for a tax rebate." Omally shook his head. "Sometimes I think that we slave away so hard in our attempts to avoid honest toil that we shall work ourselves into an early grave through the effort." "You are not suggesting we—" Pooley spoke the dreaded words in a whisper. "Get a job?" Omally winked. "Not a bit of it. We're free men, are we not? And is freedom not the most valuable possession a man can own?" "Well," said Jim, a sudden image of Jennifer Naylor's Porsche unaccountably filled his mind. "Well—" "Of course it is," Omally went on. "We live life to the full, and do you know why we do it?" Pooley thought that he did, but suspected he would not get the opportunity to say so. "We do it for the crack," said Omally, confirming Jim's suspicion. "Oh," said that man, "the crack, that lad." "That lad indeed, and," said John, who was evidently in loquacious spirits, "I'll tell you something more." "I have no doubt of it." "At 10 o'clock, Jim, you were walking to Bob the bookies." "I always do." "But today will be different." "It always is." "Because today you will place a bet, on which the face of it will appear so ludicrous that he at the Golden Gonads will rock to and fro upon his chairs doubled up with laughter." "He always does," said Jim. "You will ask him what odds he'll give you," John continued, "and between the tears of mirth he will say something like 10,000 to 1, possibly even more if he's feeling particularly rash." Jim scratched at his head. 10,000 to 1, he queried. "At the very least, you will bet £10 and pay the tax." £10? Pooley clutched at his heart. "All at once? £10? Omally nodded. "I myself will wade in with a oncer." "A oncer?" "Certainly, to show that I have the courage of my convictions, ex uncle Leonum, as the French would have it." Here he pulled from his pocket the said gros note, which by its appearance was evidently a thing of great sentimental value, and presented it to Pooley. "Gosh," said Jim, "oh, this and money too." "No idle brag at I." "Perish the thought. But do tell me, John, exactly what shall I be betting on?" "You'll be betting on a sure thing." "Oh," said Jim, without conviction. "One of those lads." "One of those very lads, straight from the horse's mouth this very morning. A little bird whispered it into my ear, and I do likewise into yours." "You seem to hold considerable sway with the animal kingdom." "'Tis a sure thing." "At 10,000 to 1. "Would you care now that I whisper?"
"What have I to lose, saving the £9?"
Omally leant forwards and poured a stream of whispered words into Pooley's left ear. Jim stood there, unblinking. A piece of chewing gum upon his instep attracted the attentions of an ant. "Oh," said Jim at length, when Omally had run dry of words. "Ah," said John, nodding enthusiastically.
"No," said Jim. "The word is no."
"The word is yes, Jim. The word is yes."
"No, no, no."
Pooley shook his head in time to his nose.
"Never and again, no."
John put his arm about his best friend's shoulders. "Believe in me," he said. "Would I steer you on a wrong un?" Jim chewed upon his lip in hesitation, and as the old saying goes,
"He who hesitates is banjoed."
"Then you'll do it, Jim."
"Why not?"
Pooley sighed pathetically.
"I will be the laughing stock of Brentford, the butt of all ribaldry in the Swan for months to come, a veritable byword of buffoonery. What do I have to lose?"
"But think what we might do with our winnings."
"You cannot be serious, John. You are telling me that—"
Omally clapped a hand across his partner's mouth. "Not even here," he said, pressing a free finger to his lips. Walls have ears. Jim shrugged and sighed simultaneously. Now then, John continued brightly, I suggest you bang a couple of free rangers into the old non-stick and have a bit of brekkie. We have a busy day ahead, and I have a couple of phone calls to make. Shaking his head in dismay, Pooley dug eggs and sausages from the fridge. The bangers were walls. They didn't have any ears.